What's up, guys? It's Teague from Battle City Games. I'm super excited today because I get to bring y'all a profile for Shaddoll's post Ghost from a Past. So this deck got a little bit more support in this set, and I think it actually adds a lot, even though it was only 1 or 2 cards. So today I'm bringing you my Magistus Shaddoll build for the April 2021 format post Ghost from a Past. Let's go ahead and hop on into it. So we're going to start with the main deck as always. And like I said, this is Magistus Shaddoll's. So we're going to be playing the 3 Releona, the Magistus of Vir. So Releona is one of our starter cards. What she allows you to do when she is summoned, you get to search a Magistus spell from your deck and add it to your hand. And why that is important is because they actually have a fusion spell that you'll see a little bit later. So she's one of the cards that you definitely want to see in your opening hand. And it helps that she's a light target, so she can get you into Construct right away. Moving on from there, we're going to get into our Shaddoll cards. And first up is going to be the classic Shaddoll Squamata. So in case you don't know what Squamata does, when he is flipped, you get to target a monster on the field and destroy it. And then when Squamata is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you get to send 1 Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard. And the important thing to remember with all the Shaddoll cards is that you can only activate 1 of their effects in a turn. So you can't flip them and then send them to the graveyard by a card effect and get both effects. You have to do either or. Moving on from Squamata, we're going to be seeing Shaddoll Windy. This is one of the new Shaddolls that we actually saw in the Shaddoll Structure deck last year, and she was a huge boost to the deck. So Windy has the actual same 2 effects for both her flip and sent to graveyard effect, which allows her to special summon a Shaddoll monster from your deck in face down defense position. That's great because no matter how she gets activated, you're still going to get the same effect, whereas some of the other Shaddoll monsters, their better effect may be locked behind either being flipped or sent by a card effect. So she's definitely one of the best monsters you always want to see in your opening hand to get your combos going. Moving on from Windy, we're going to be going to our 2-ofs, which are going to be 2 Nail Shaddoll Ariel. And Ariel's effects are both actually really strong. So her flip effect, when she is flipped, you're allowed to special summon 1 Shaddoll from your banished zone, which is, again, a big part of how you get your combos started. And then her sent to graveyard effect is actually also very strong. It allows you to banish up to 3 cards from your opponent's graveyard. So it's kind of like a buffed up DD Crow that can really help you disrupt your opponent's plays if they are playing a graveyard-centric deck. Moving on, we're going to get into our 1-ofs for the deck. And first up is going to be that new Nest Shaddoll Genius from Ghost from the Past. So Genius has 2 really strong effects. Her first one is when she is flipped, you can target 1 Shaddoll monster you control. That face-up monster is unaffected by monster effects this turn. And then what I'm really playing her for is her sent to graveyard effect, which when she is sent to a graveyard by a card effect, you get to target 1 monster on the field, and that target cannot activate its effects for the rest of the turn. So she's great for disruption. If you can get her to the graveyard during your opponent's turn, you can target one of their key pieces and negate its effects for the rest of the turn. So that's a great way to go ahead and disrupt your opponent mid-combo. Moving on from Genius, we've got one of the classic Shaddoll Beast. So Beast effects are both very similar. When he is sent to a graveyard by a card effect, you get to draw 1 card. So it's kind of like an upstart goblin. And then if he's flipped, you get to draw 2 cards and discard a card. So it gets you a little bit deeper into your deck. And remember, that card you discard is going to a graveyard off of a card effect. So if you discard one of your Shaddoll monsters, you will be able to trigger that effect as well. Moving on from Beast, we have Shaddoll Dragon. Another one of Shaddoll Dragon also has 2 very strong effects. So when he is flipped, you're going to get to target 1 card on the field and return it to the hand. So he is a walking compulsory evacuation device. And then his other effect, when he is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you get to target a spell or trap card and destroy it. So he can make for some great back row disruption or taking out stuff like field spells during your opponent's turn. Moving on from there, we have the 1 Shaddoll Falco. Falco's effects, his flip effect, when he is flipped, you get to special summon 1 Shaddoll monster from your graveyard. in face down defense position. So he's great for maybe getting back something like a Squamata during your opponent's turn, or a Windy in order to help you wall up a little bit. And then his Sent to Graveyard effect actually allows him to special summon himself back in face down defense position. Now remember, you can't trigger both those effects in one turn, but you can actually send Shaddoll Falco on a card effect during your opponent's turn, and then if he's still around on your turn, you'll be able to flip him up to special summon another Shaddoll monster from your graveyard. Moving on from Falco, we are only playing one Shaddoll Hedgehog now. So Shaddoll's Hedgehog flip effect allows you to add one Shaddoll spell or trap from your deck to your hand. So this is a great way to search your fusion spells if you don't already have them in your hand. And then when he is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you do get to add one Shaddoll monster from your deck to your hand. So that can also be good, again, for getting you stuff like your Squamata or your Windy, or maybe if you have some disruption and you want to go ahead and add that Genius to your hand for your opponent's turn. That's it for the Shaddoll monsters, guys. Next up, we are playing the one of Mathematician. So Mathematician is a classic for Shaddoll decks. A lot of decks used to play him at 3, but now that the deck has evolved some, we went ahead and cut him down to 1. His effect, when he is summoned, you get to send any level 4 or lower monster from your deck to the graveyard. And we are playing Shaddolls, which means whatever we send will be able to trigger its graveyard effect. Mathematician makes for a great starter. If we don't open with that Squamata or that Windy, we can go ahead and summon him and get our Shaddoll engine going. He does have a secondary effect that when he's destroyed by battle, you can draw a card. To be honest, that doesn't really come up nowadays, but it's there just in case. So that's it for the main monsters, guys. Next up, for our hand traps, we are playing the 3 Psyframe Gamma and the 1 Psyframe Driver. So the reason that we went with this hand trap lineup is because Gamma is a light monster, so he is a live target for fusing into your construct if you don't need him in your hand. And while most decks don't really have a use for the Psyframe Driver if they draw it, once again, he's a light monster, so we can actually use him to fuse into construct, and then he can still be revived through Gamma later on. Also, since we tend to activate cards while we don't have monsters on the board, if we're going second with something like a Shaddoll Fusion, if our opponent tries to Ash Blossom that, we have the Gamma to continue our plays. So that's going to be it for the monsters, guys. Next up, we're going to be moving on to our spell cards. And to start that off, of course, we have to have the 3 Shaddoll Fusions. This card was insane when it was first printed, and in my opinion, it's just as insane nowadays. Shaddoll Fusion allows you to fusion summon 1 Shaddoll monster using monsters from your hand or field, but where this card gets really broken is that if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, you can actually send monsters from your deck to the graveyard. So it gives you access to your entire deck for that fusion summon, giving you whatever materials you need at that time. And remember, again, being used for fusion summon is, of course, a card effect, so any Shaddoll monster you send will trigger. Moving on from there, we have our next fusion card, which is going to be triple L Shaddoll Fusion. This one came out a little bit after Shaddoll Fusion was originally printed and was a great boost to Shaddoll decks. It is a quick play fusion that allows you to fusion summon by using monsters from your hand or field. So we don't get to send from deck, but being a quick play allows us to do some really cool stuff on our opponent's turn, or even to extend our plays in the battle phase, So this is definitely a card that you want at 3 in your deck because you want to maximize your odds, 1, of opening with a fusion spell, but 2, of being able to extend your plays and extend your combos throughout your opponent's turn. That's it for the 3-ofs. We are actually not playing any 2-ofs in this deck, so we're going to get straight to the 1-ofs. First, we have Majesty's Invocation, which is our first search target for Rilliona. And this is just a basic fusion spell. It allows us to fusion summon a monster from our extra deck by using monsters from our hand or field. We just have to use a spellcaster monster as one of the materials. But again, luckily, all of our Shaddoll monsters, for the most part, are spellcasters, so we still have plenty of options. And the big reason we want this is because, once again, it's searchable by Rilliona. So if we open Rilliona, we have access to that fusion spell to start right off. Now, some people do like to play 2 invocations, but I decided to go a little bit different route, and I am playing the 1 Magistus Vitra. This is a really great card for an extender. It just allows you to target 1 level 4 or lower Magistus monster in your graveyard, and then you special summon that monster. And the reason we're playing the 1 Vitra and the 1 invocation is because if you open your Ray Leona and you already have a fusion spell, you don't really need to search your invocation. So now you can search your Vitra, which will allow you to revive your Ray Leona during your combos to extend your plays to make a better board overall. Moving on from the Vitra, we have the staple 1 of Foolish Burial. Send 1 monster from your deck to the graveyard. All of our Shaddoll monsters want to be sent off of card effects, so of course we would play a card that gives us access to any of them. After that, we are trying out the 1 Pot of Avarice in the deck. So in Shaddolls, especially in this build, you tend to go through several of your monsters even on your first turn. It's not unrealistic to have 5 monsters in your graveyard on your first turn, making Pot of Avarice live from the start. But also if you get into a grindier game, you will find that you go through a lot of your fusions and your Shaddoll monsters very quickly due to all your different effects that send them. So Pot of Avarice just gives us a way to get a lot of those monsters back into the extra deck to make sure that we can keep playing when we are in some of those grindier games. And drawing the 2 cards off of it is always nice, of course. Moving on from there, we get to our traps, and to start us off, we are playing 3 Sinister Shadow games. This is a classic in Shaddoll builds. It allows us to send 1 Shaddoll card from our deck to the graveyard, and then we also get to change any number of our face-down defense position Shaddoll monsters to face-up defense position, which will, of course, trigger their flip effects. So we get a Foolish Burial in trap form, and we get to flip our monsters during our opponent's turn, which can allow us to trigger forms of disruption such as Shaddoll Squamata or Shaddoll Dragon. This is just a great extender for our opponent's turn, and again, since we now have Shaddoll Genius, we can actually send Genius to the graveyard off of Shadow Game's effect directly from our deck, which will allow us to target one of our opponent's monsters and prevent them from activating its effect. And then if we also have a face-down monster like Squamata, that will flip to destroy a card, so Genius really allows Shadow Games to offer a lot more disruptions than it used to. Moving on from the Shadow Games, we are playing 2 Dogmatica Punishments. This allows us to send a monster from our extra deck to the graveyard to target a face-up monster on the field that has less attack than the monster we sent, and destroy it. The only restriction is we cannot special summon from the extra deck until the end of our next turn. But the idea is that we'll have our board already established when we're activating this, and so we won't really need to be going back into our extra deck. But the disruptions that this has by sending cards from the extra deck to the graveyard usually allows us to not just get the 1 disruption from punishment itself, but to also get another 1 to 2 disruptions off of the same card. In that same vein, we are also running 2 Paleozoic Dinomiscus. Dinomiscus allows us to discard a card to banish 1 face-up card on the field. And keep in mind that discard is not a cost, that is part of the card effect. So once again, this will be triggering our Shaddoll effects. And again, it pairs really well with a card like Genius, because we can target a card to banish, and then we can use the Genius's effect to target a card and prevent it from activating its effect. So we're getting, again, a double disruption. That's really what it's all about nowadays, guys, is getting as many disruptions off of as few cards as possible. Moving on, we get to our 2 one-ofs. First up is going to be Shaddoll Schism. This is an absolutely amazing card that got introduced in Rise of the Duelist and really kind of what Shaddoll needed to allow them a little more interactivity. So during the main phase, we can fusion summon 1 Shaddoll monster by banishing materials from our graveyard. And it cannot attack directly, but we do, when we do that summon, we do also get to send 1 monster our opponent controls that has the same attribute as the monster we summoned to the graveyard. And that's not a targeting effect, so this is a great option for outing cards like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. And this is a continuous trap card, so we can activate it on our opponent's turn, and then if Schism is still around when our turn comes back around, we can use it to conduct another fusion summon if we have the materials in our graveyard. This is an absolutely amazing card, The only reason we play it as a one of is because it is highly searchable in the deck, and we also have recursion to get it back from our graveyard. And then the last card for the main deck is going to be the one Shaddoll Incarnation. So Incarnation has two really strong effects, although we do primarily only use one of them. The way this card works, we can banish the card and one Shaddoll card from our graveyard, and then activate one of these effects. We can change one face-up monster we control to face-down position. Not really going to be doing that one too much. Or we can change one face-down monster we control to face-up position, which will then trigger any flip effects. So that's one we're primarily going for. And then if it's on the board when we activate it, we can actually special summon a Shaddoll monster from our graveyard. So if it's on the board, we get to flip it, special summon from our graveyard, and then once it's in the graveyard, we can banish it along with a Shaddoll monster to activate one of those two flip effects. So that's going to do it for the main deck, guys. Now to move on into the extra deck, we are, of course, going to be playing 3 Shaddoll Constructs, the classic. So she just takes one Shaddoll monster and any light monster, which again is why we chose cards like Gamma to make sure we have access to plenty of light monsters. And when she's special summoned, you can send one Shaddoll card from your deck to the graveyard. And if she battles any special summon monster, you can destroy it at the start of the damage step. And then when she is sent to the graveyard, we get to target one Shaddoll spell or trap in her graveyard and add it back to our hand. And keep in mind, again, that's when she's sent to the graveyard by any means. So you can link her off. Any way that she gets sent, you're going to trigger that effect. Moving on from the construct, we do have the 2 Shaddoll Ip Cologne. This is another one of the new cards that we saw in the Shaddoll structure deck. She just takes any 2 Shaddoll monsters with different attributes, and she cannot be destroyed by battle. And then she also has 2 other effects. When she is special summoned, you get to target one face-up card on the field and negate its effects. And keep in mind, that's not negate its effects for the rest of the turn. That just permanently negates its effects. And then also, when she is sent to the graveyard, you get to add one Shaddoll card from your deck to your hand, and then discard one card. And that can be from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So again, that's where I was talking about that recursion earlier. We really have some great options to get what we need back to our hand. Moving on from the Ip Cologne, we are playing 2 Shaddoll Winda. Winda is another one of the classic Shaddoll monsters. She cannot actually be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and while she is face up on the field, each player can only special summon one time per turn. So Winda is a walking floodgate, and really what Shaddoll decks nowadays tend to revolve around. Using Schism, you can summon Winda during your opponent's turn, and restrict them to only one summon. This is especially good if you chain Schism to a summon that your opponent tries to activate, meaning that once that summon resolves, they will be locked out of special summoning for the rest of the turn. And then if she is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one Shaddoll spell or trap in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So again, more recursion. Moving on from there, that's all of our Shaddoll fusions. Next up is going to be one copy of Elder Entity Nittis. Nittis, the reason it's in the deck is when it is sent to the graveyard, you get to target a card on the field and destroy it. And again, we are playing those Dogmatica punishments, so we can send Nittis, and we can pop one card off of punishment, and then we'll get another pop off of Elder Entity. So that's 2 pops from one card. Again, we're going back to that value per card. That's going to be it for the fusion monster, guys. Now we're going to get into the links. First up is going to be Artemis, the Magistus Moon Maiden. She is a Link 1 that requires any level 4 or lower spellcaster monster. We don't really care about her effect in this deck because we're not playing a heavier Magistus engine. The only reason she is here is because she is a light spellcaster that we can go into. So one thing that Shaddoll used to struggle with was sometimes getting access to a light monster to make Construct. You were forced to play subpar monsters that you maybe would not otherwise play in your main deck, and sometimes you can't always open those light monsters. Now with Artemis, any Shaddoll monster that we open, or our Mathematician, can be linked off into Artemis to make sure we have access to that light. Moving on, we have the 1 Gravity Controller. This is a Link 1 that must be link summoned using a non-link monster in the extra monster zone. This is here so that we can make our construct, and then we have the ability to go ahead and link our construct off from that extra monster zone to be able to trigger her effect to add whatever we sent to the graveyard off of her first effect back to our hand in order to continue our combos. Moving on from there, we have the one Shaddoll Construct. This is the link to Shaddoll that takes any 2 flip monsters and is a walking fusion. So during our main phase, we can fusion summon one Shaddoll monster using monsters from our hand or field as material. And then she actually has a second effect that's also very strong, where if she is in the graveyard, we can send one Shaddoll card from our hand or face-up field to the graveyard, and if we do, we special summon her back. And this allows us not only to recur her in order to continue fusion summoning if we need to, but also to trigger our Shaddoll effects in the process. She's a very powerful link monster for the deck. We then play the one Cross Sheep. This requires 2 monsters with different names, and the primary reason we play this is when we special summon a fusion monster to a zone it points to, we get to special summon one level 4 lower monster from our graveyard. So again, we can use this in our combos to get some free summons back to our board and continue either link climbing or fusion summoning depending on our hand. Our last link 2 for the deck is going to be the one Ip Mascarina. Mascarina requires 2 non-link monsters, and during our opponent's main phase we can use her to link summon into another monster, and the monster link summoned with her using that effect cannot be destroyed by our opponent's card effects. And you'll see why that's so important here in just a minute. Our link 3 monster for the deck is going to be our Nightmare Unicorn. This is one of our 2 options to make off of Ip Mascarina. We use her effect during our opponent's turn to link into Nightmare Unicorn, and then when Unicorn is summoned, we get to discard a card to bounce one of our opponent's cards from their field. So we can use this as another form of disruption during our opponent's turn, and we do get the bonus that the Unicorn can't be destroyed by card effects, although that's not what we're primarily going for here. And then the last card for the extra deck is a personal attack of mine that I think really catches a lot of people off guard. And that's going to be the one Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax. So Avermax is a link 4 that requires 2 or more monsters special summoned from the extra deck. And while he is on the field, our opponent cannot target other monsters for attacks. They have to attack Avermax. And he can also not be targeted by card effects. So that means if we link summon him using the Ip Mascarina, he cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. Meaning our opponent has to have a form of non-targeting, non-destruction removal to get around him. Which, to be honest, a lot of decks just don't play in their main deck. Which is why if you put him out, a lot of people will have a hard time outing him. And then his other effect, which makes it even more difficult, is that when he battles a special summon monster, you can activate the effect to make him gain attack equal to your opponent's monster until the end of battle. So no matter how powerful their monster is, Avermax will always be able to get over it, and that effect is not a once per turn. So every single time he battles a special summon monster, you'll be able to activate that effect, making him a very difficult monster for your opponent to get over. Alright guys, so that's it for the deck profile. I hope you liked it. I would love to know what your favorite build of Shaddoll is right now. There's multiple other builds such as Trap Shaddoll and Invoke Shaddoll. Let me know which one you think is best, and maybe if you would like to see some of those other deck profiles, we can definitely get those going for y'all. In the meantime, I'm Teague from Battle City Games. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it, and go ahead and subscribe for more content. Thanks.